We welcome our viewing audience. Thank you for joining us for another episode of BILALIAN Voices in the tradition of Imam W. Deen Muhammad. Today's date is January 9th, 2025, and today's featured guest is Imam Qasim Abdul-Tawwab. As always, we begin by greeting as we Muslims greet. Peace be upon you. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
My name is Terenzo El-Amin, Imam and business owner here in Cincinnati, Ohio, joined with my co-host, Imam Hanif Abdul-Wahid out of Rochester, New York. And before we get into tonight's program, we would like to share with you a few announcements regarding the upcoming events associated with the leadership of Imam Earl Abdul Malik Muhammad. Our annual Savior's Day observance in the tradition of Imam W. D. Muhammad will be commencing on Sunday, February the 23rd, 2025 in Detroit, Michigan, commemorating 95 years of Muslim African-American life and leadership excellence, with a state of community address delivered by the successor and partner of Imam W. D. Muhammad, Imam Earl Abdul Malik Muhammad. His address is entitled, "The Integrity of Our Historic Life, W. D. Muhammad and the Sacred Plan to Establish Community of Faith and Justice." This Savior's Day commemoration will be held at the International Institute of Metropolitan Detroit, there in Detroit, Michigan. The address is 111 East Kirby Street. Doors open at 1 p.m. Program begins at 2 p.m. It is free and open to the public. And also, it is the 50-year anniversary of Imam W. D. Muhammad coming to leadership of his father's movement and organization. And as you can see, I am wearing a t-shirt commemorating that day, February 26, 1975, a special day in the history of a people. You can go to saviorsday.com for more information. And as you see from the apparel, the tradition continues. All praise is due to Allah. Every Wednesday at 7 p.m., watch the excellent podcast called Family Ties, a Prescription for Society, the Frank and Farida Show. And we just mentioned as a side note that Farida is the daughter of the person that we are interviewing tonight. So you see the connection there. You can find this podcast on Apple, Spotify, and iHeartRadio every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Family Ties, a Prescription for Society. Join us every Sunday morning for our very productive Islamic studies class taught in the tradition of Muhammad the Prophet with the mythology of Imam W. D. Muhammad, led by his successor, Imam Earl Abdul Malik Muhammad. This is every Sunday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern. You can go to eamspeaks.com, hit the tab Islamic Studies class. It's free to register to join this very productive class taught by Imam Earl Abdul Malik Muhammad. Now what we would like to do is turn it over to my co-host, Imam Hanif Abdul-Wahid.
Assalamu alaikum, viewing audience, and we thank you for joining us tonight. We're very excited to have with us a pioneer in his own rights. He's our Imam, Qasim Abdul-Tawwab. And I had the pleasure over the weekend sitting down with Imam Qasim for a little bit, and we exchanged a lot of information. And we thought we need to have him on Bilalian Voices. And my guess is that he'll be a regular because he has such a wealth of knowledge here. But Imam, what we really like to start out with is just an introduction of yourself and let us know how you come to the religion of Al-Islam. Give us a little background on yourself, who you are, where you were born, and your sojourning.
Yeah, assalamu alaikum to everyone. And I want to thank you for having me on your esteemed show that I've enjoyed so much in the past. As you said, I'm Qasim Abdul-Tawwab, and I came into the Nation of Islam with so many others. I came in, got my ex in 1971, but I came in 1970. And to editorialize a little bit, I love history, and I get a little bit upset because of the misinformation on my generation. And I think Imam Abdul-Wahid, I think we're in the same one. But the biggest movement for college age folk in the late 1960s was the Nation of Islam, the Temple of Islam. We came in droves at that time. Stokely Carmichael or Kwame Ture had left for West Africa and didn't come back except for to give lectures. But the paper of record was the Muhammad Speaks newspaper. The movement that had been capturing our attention since the early 60s was the Law Foundation of Islam. So I was a student at Morehouse College in Atlanta, Georgia, and had the privilege of attending Temple number 15 on Bankhead Highway in Atlanta, hearing, at the time he was Minister Samuel. He later became Minister Rahman, who was a very dynamic minister. If anyone saw that show about, what was the show about Miami, Florida, when Malcolm, Sam Cooke, and Muhammad Ali were all together in a club there. They made a movie a couple of years about that.
Oh, yes.
But the key.
Yes, I can't recall that. It was a movie that took place. Was it around the mid '60s?
Yeah, it was in the early '60s. It was right after the listing. At that time, it was caliphate.
Right.
And the next day, Muhammad Ali came out as a Muslim. He made the announcement. And but the guy who was the key there was actually Minister Sam. He was Captain Sam at that time. He was a guy named, he used to be in the corner for Muhammad Ali. So I came in under him. I was had the privilege at that time of being the president of the Student Government Association for Morehouse College. Now, I wasn't the president I wasn't a Muslim when they elected me, but as of September, mid-September, when I first went to the temple, once I went, that was it. That was it. That's where I was. I never left. I've never spent a week without dealing with Islam since then. So I had to be a little subtle about it because, as I said, they didn't elect me that way. We were able to bring in as a speaker, Minister Rahman. He kind of shook him up. And we also brought in John Woodford. I don't know if you remember John Woodford, but he was the last non-Muslim editor of the Muhammad Speaks newspaper. We brought him in as a speaker as well. So we were able to, and we were given credit by the psychologist, Naeem Akbar. Naeem Akbar was then at Morehouse as acting head of the psychology department. And it was when he heard Minister Rahman speaking that he decided he got moved to come into the Nation of Islam, as I had. So he would tell me that he gave me credit. For those who don't know, he became the spokesperson for Imam Qasim Muhammad during the transition because he knew social psychology. He helped the Imam thought he could help him in translating some of the terminologies and concepts that he was giving to us to help us move away from our old way of thinking, using his psychological understanding and language. So that's when I first got in. I don't want to run on too long, so You tell me, should I go on or should I stop?
Well, I think that's an interesting beginning, but you'd have a very big career. And when Imam W.D. Muhammad came in, what was your thoughts at that time then? And your following with him is that, as my understanding, you had a pretty good understanding and relationship with him.
With the Imam Qasim Muhammad, I think we all did. Well,
Yes.
I should. When I first heard what I heard from the temple, it would have been nice to have avoided it because it made complications in career path. I came from a strong church background. My father was a pastor. I don't come to Howard Thurman lately. I've been involved with Howard Thurman, NAACP, all of my life. So there was something pulling me into the Nation of Islam when I came, and it wasn't necessarily there when I got in. If I'm not going too far afield, meaning I read everything I saw as, I rejoiced when I first started learning the mythology of the Nation of Islam before I ever went to the temple. I said, oh, these people have made up their own mythology to counter this bad mythology we have in Christianity. I said, this is great. Meaning by bad, it centered us on white figures, as many of our Christian preachers critiqued. The angels were white, God was white, Jesus was white, everything's white. And the whole Yaqub story, there's a gentleman by the name of, I can't think, one of the poets, not Don Lee, one of the black poets in that Black Power era, that Black Arts era, who went deeply into the mythology of the Nation of Islam to make art. So I was excited by this. But when I got in and got my X and started studying the lessons, I saw a literalism, an acceptance of the mythology that you kind of had to be part of it if you're on the roster. And I ended up being on the roster along with being a teacher and eventually the Dean of Boys at the University of Islam. You had to accept it. So I kind of just worked on being a good FOI, sell the Muhammad Speaks newspaper, sell the Writing H&G, et cetera, et cetera. And there was something, I was learning that, but when Imam Muhammad came in, the doors opened, the windows opened up, the light came in. I think I was, there was a lot of us. So the minute that I heard him, when he used to speak to us every month, pardon me, and he asked us at that time, what we call now take bayah, to take our allegiance to him, to ask if we believed that he in fact was a person who was inspired by God. The minute that I said yes, and thousands of others said yes, I think some of them may have forgotten. But once I said yes, I was with Imam Muhammad, or Arthur D. Muhammad, and anything that I thought that I knew, I had to re-examine from what he was giving us. I don't know if that's the direction that the answer that you're.
Yeah, that's a perfect answer there. And from my understanding, you had a pretty good career up under the leadership of Imam W.D. Muhammad. Tell us a little bit about you being over the Clara Muhammad schools in Boston.
Well, it's interesting. It's we had the Universities of Islam. We had just reopened the University of Islam reopened in Boston because it had been open for a year under the wife of Don Muhammad, who just passed a few weeks ago, who was the leader of that temple under Louis Farrakhan. He, along with many people, split and started that new Nation of Islam. But his wife, back in the late 60s, had been a leader had been the principal of the Muhammad University of Islam for a year, and then it closed. And then a sister by the name of Thelma Moss, who was one of the creators of the famous plays Organa and the Trial. She had it in her own basement for years. So she opened it, but then it closed again. It reopened as part in association with the Roxbury Medical Technical Institute in 1971, and I was honored to be on the staff as a teacher and then as the dean of boys there. But we closed in '75 when with the transition. As we all know, a lot of things got confused. We closed, and we worked on getting it back open, and it reopened in 1980. And the key person there, and the key person in my life, I should say, outside of our leadership, was Sister Najra Abdul-Tawwab, whom I married in 1974. She was a person who I was behind her. She was pushing. Was a master teacher, and she when the school reopened in 1980. We had one grade, and she was a teacher. She was a master teacher. After a year, I came on as a volunteer director, and we got our school committee approval. We were the first of the Claire Muhammad schools at that time to get approved completely by the school committee, which was the state authority. We were approved in 1982, I think it was. We purchased a school building from the city of Boston, a large building, and we moved up to about 8 grades within 3 years. And the wonderful school that we have in Atlanta, Georgia, the original principal of that school has given papers telling how she was inspired by the school in Boston, Massachusetts. So I was honored to be able to work there, to work in the prisons several times as a volunteer chaplain, briefly as a paid chaplain. Also was able to work on the for while I was a representative of Temple, Mesti al-Quran, which was originally number 11, on the Black Ministerial Alliance. I was able to be the co-director, along with a brother by the name of Rashad Munir, of the grade committee. I look back at those times. I feel like all of us, anything you could do, you did. And thank Allah for the opportunity to do it.
We could tell that you're well read and have given a tremendous amount of your time, along with your family, to the leadership of Imam W.D. Muhammad. We thank you and we appreciate you for that. Imam Terenzo, did you want to?
Yes, I had a question in regards to, I'm sitting here, I'm listening, very rich history. And we thank Imam Qasim for joining our program tonight. You mentioned something in your opening in regards to the college students, the phenomenon of the college students accepting the Honorable Elijah Mohammed's message and how that's underreported. Could you speak more to that? What was the attraction for college students to his message? Because I know here in Cincinnati, it's a lot of people that came in as college students during that time.
It was the biggest movement there. When you look at the history now, they act as if the Panther Party was what was happening. The Panther Party wasn't what was happening. It just wasn't. Panther Party wasn't doing much. The Panther Party was actually local. It was out of Oakland, California. And then you had what you had in Chicago and New Haven. You had different branches that were basically local. They saw what we saw. We saw them on TV with their fezzes on, with their cams on, pardon me, and their guns, walking into the legislature, lobbying for the right to carry guns. But aside from that, they had very little. In fact, the people who excited us were the FOI. I mean, the young people, they were on the corner everywhere in all the cities, selling papers, selling suits, inviting you to the mosque. You couldn't get away from them, okay? And coming with this, and we soon recognized, when I was in Atlanta, that's of course where Dr. King was. Now I should say, I went to Atlanta the first time for Dr. King's funeral, which was in 1968. Of course, when Dr. King got shot in '68, that really, all the cities went up. I was at Lincoln University that year, and they sent us home. There was no Lincoln. We're right by Oxford. We're in the middle of white America, and they said, "Get those Negroes and send them away from us." Gil Scott Heron was there, and he actually marched on the city of Oxford before most of us even had heard what was happening. I don't know if you remember Gil Scott-Heron, but he could be an incendiary character, and we were in the freshman class together there. And so, but the King Library drew in scholars from throughout the country. Vincent Harding was one of the key movers. Lerone Bennett was there. I was lucky enough to study under him. But what happened was the movement of Islam was so strong. Coretta Scott King actually required the scholars to sign a pledge that they would only support Dr. King's nonviolent approach completely, and they wouldn't do that. So they actually got put out. They lost. Coretta Scott King was controlling the money, but they started something called the Institute of the Black World. And I remember the opening of the Institute of the Black World was probably '69, and everyone was there. Larry Neal is a poet I was trying to think of who used the mythology of the Nation of Islam. Larry Neal was there. Sonia Sanchez was there. Nikki Giovanni was there. And they were flashing up pictures of different African-American heroes. Now, they didn't ever flash Honorable Elijah Mohammed. They did not. But when they flashed Malcolm, it's pandemonium. They had to stop. It was like the old folks in the churches that they would come to Jesus moment. Just everything stopped. Okay. So what was Malcolm presenting? Nothing but the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. He didn't have anything past that. And so a lot of the Malcolmites, we ended up going, I wasn't really a Malcolmite, although I was impressed by him. I was more a Stokely Carmichael guy. We all ended up sooner or later, at least going to the temple. So that was the movement. That was the strongest. As a matter of fact, I'm going to tell you why I went, if I can. I remember going back home for a week after I finished my summer job in Atlanta. Home at that time was in Boston. And I came back and I saw this brother that I knew he was an alpha. I thought he was kind of silly. And he liked to party. He wasn't about anything. He was supposed to be a pre-med major, but he wasn't ever going to finish that. And here this brother was clean, bow tie on, Muhammad speaks under the arm, sit on the paper. I said, oh, what? This brother? I said, I've been saying I was going to go. I better go now. And then a partner of mine said, well, let's go. So we went. That brother, by the way, he burned his bed. The Nation of Islam impressed him so much, he said, I don't have time to rest. I've got to finish. And he finished his med degree. His pre-med, he was way behind. He finished in a year and a half. Unfortunately, once he got his med degree, we never saw him again. But the Nation of Islam was that kind of a magnet to us. We had a sister from Spelman who would come to class in an MDT uniform. She went all the time, and we all noticed that. But yes, the literature they don't act as if the Nation of Islam was a student movement among the college age and the college students. The guys coming back from Vietnam, of course, were flowing in, but those of us who were in college, that was moving us. And that's why as proof, I say this. In 1966, I think we had about 5 universities of Islam at that. And the main ones were in Detroit and Chicago. I think there was one in Milwaukee. And I know in Chicago, many of the teachers were not Muslim, and the principal was not Muslim. We had a shortage of trained people, and we only had 3 to 5 schools. Within 3 years, we had like 75 schools. And all the teachers were Muslims. Where did they come from? There was young guys coming, women mainly, coming out of the school. So there was a huge movement, and it's not being reported. At least that's not.
Let me ask you now, what are you currently involved in? What are you doing now?
Well, right now I'm allegedly retired, but I'm spending all my time as the what do I call myself? The site manager for the Howard Thurman Historic Home. And as I think you made some mention of Dr. Thurman, but Dr. Thurman is a man who was born, he was born 2 years after the Honorable Elijah Mohammed. And their careers, he outlived the Honorable Elijah Mohammed by 6 years.
Mhm.
But their careers were very parallel. They were even parallel in that each of them is associated with an important religious figure from India who had a very strong impact upon their development as religious, cultural, and social reformers. In the case of Dr. Thurman, it was Mahatma Gandhi, whom he visited in his ashram in the mid-1930s. He was the first African-American to do so. And of course, in the case of our late leader, the Honorable Elijah Mohammed, it was Farad Mohammed, who visited him and us. We are whose anniversary of July 4th, 1930, inshallah, we will be celebrating shortly.
That's interesting.
So they were very parallel. And so I've been honored to become the key person for the last, since 2012. So I guess that's 12 years now that I have been the key person. It's been keeping the Howard Thurman Historic Home afloat. And it is a premier interfaith location. It is the place where Dr. Thurman grew up from the time he was 1 in 1900 to 1917 when he went off to school. Did we do a reprise of Dr. Thurman already? I don't want to go over what we've already
Well, no, not at all. But let me say this here is that the little backstory to this here. You're a Muslim now that is vouchsafing this history. I did a little research earlier and found that your father, the Reverend Jefferson P. Rogers, was a student at Howard University, and his professor was Dr. Howard Thurman. And your father became an individual that had a lot to do with having this house recognized, restored, and made into what you're vouchsafing right now. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes, I should say both my father, Jefferson Paramore Rogers, who is a Floridian, and my mother, Mary Grace Harris Rogers, who is originally from Shreveport, Louisiana. She's a Village University, New Orleans graduate. They were both worked hard to save his house, the Thurman house, which was scheduled to be destroyed in the early 1980s. If you come onto our street, which is Whitehall Street in Daytona Beach, Florida, you will see, we've got some new houses going up now. But a few years ago, there were perhaps, in one block, there were perhaps 7 vacant lots, and maybe 4 that still had buildings on them. Each of those lots had a home on it before. Whitehall Street was the first street in which African-American homeowners owned homes in Daytona. We are right to the west of the railroad tracks. Because in Florida, Black folks, we were always to the west of the railroad tracks. The beachside homes, that was white only. So we are the classical across the tracks community. When the house was scheduled to be destroyed, there was one of the city fathers, whose name I should always remember, and it always slips me, African-American gentleman, Alpha Phi Alpha. I'm not Alpha Phi Alpha, that's just what he was. He was looking for people to save it. And because my father, Jefferson Rogers, was pretty well known as a student, close friend and supporter of Dr. Thurman, he reached out to him. At the time, he, along with my mother and another of the major people was Arthur Ashe. I don't know if you remember the tennis player Arthur Ashe.
Yes,
Arthur Ashe was part of this not-for-profit called New Birth Corporation Incorporated. And they had decided Arthur really wanted to build a high school for African-American males. He was concerned that African-American males were getting left behind, weren't prepared for the world that was opening up. As a person who had access to that world through his tennis and through the jobs that he did, through the life that he lived, he wanted to make this available. But when Jefferson Rogers, my father, learned that Dr. Thurman's home was about to be destroyed, he tried to talk Ash and the rest, the people on that not-for-profit to support that. It took him a while. I remember Arthur told him, he said, well, Jeff, who's heard of Thurman but you? But he convinced him. Arthur's from Richmond. And they moved in. They were able to save the house. They had a hard time working to raise the money. They got a lot of help from a lot of people. Walter Fauntleroy, who was a leading SCLC person in Washington, D.C., was one of the people who put up his house at one time to get the money, because it cost about $500,000 to renovate the house. But it was eventually renovated and dedicated in 1987. And I was able to be there for the dedication. The people who were supporting it, for years it was affiliated to some extent with Stetson University in DeLand, Florida. They had a very historic speaker series that brought people like Angela Davis and Kwame Ture. You name it, if there was somebody in the civil rights movement who was of importance, they would try to pull it. And since Dr. Jefferson Rogers had been in the movement, he had been on the national board of SCLC, he'd spent a lifetime there, they were able to pull those people. Samuel Proctor, every month during the school year, they would have a very important speaker. But long story short, go ahead.
Yeah. No, I was just saying this activism runs very deep into your family and your roots. It's very telling to have this here. I wanted to ask you a question and your take on Dr. Howard Thurman. He, as you alluded to earlier, was a student of Mahatma Gandhi. And it has been said by Mahatma Gandhi that his nonviolence movement, he didn't get the full expression of it out when he was in India and to the world. And it was his hopes that Dr. Thurman could come back to the United States and have this movement catch on, and where it would be expressed in an unadulterated type of way in that expression. And we know that Dr. Martin Luther King finally took that movement and did great things with it. What are your thoughts on that?
100%. Brother, you said it all, but I just put a little mustard on it if I can. One of the things that I think that you're making reference to, that Gandhi said that Gandhi and Thurman only got to speak on one occasion, but they were there for hours. And of course, Gandhi grilled him on everything about American Negroes, as you recall. But and Thurman grilled him on this whole theory of what is it, Satagara? I don't have my cheat sheet here to get all the right terminology, but his nonviolent approach that it actually did break the hold of the colonizer over India. Mm-hmm. But Gandhi was forthcoming in that he hadn't really gotten it to work. He said, if one person could be a perfect in this nonviolence, it could work. But he did vouchsafe to Dr. Thurman that he thought perhaps the place it could be done successfully was with the American Negro. Mm-hmm. And what he said so closely parallels what we heard Imam Abdul-Malik Muhammad say to us a few days ago.
Yes.
In DC, that they could be reflections of the other. So it is clear, I should say, my take is that Dr. Thurman, what he's searching for is the same thing that Honorable Elijah Mohammed was searching for. But that we have it in clarity now. The whole issue, there was always a dissatisfaction with Christianity, no matter how excited we were by the upside. And I'm going to give an example of what I mean, if I may.
Yes.
Now, Dr. Thurman's inspiration was his grandmother, and I forget names. That's what I'm looking over. I got to get the name right. Nancy Ambrose. Nancy was born into slavery and lived as a slave for the first almost 20 years of her life. But it was the house that we have, the house that we are maintaining and keep open as a historical site, was owned by Nancy Ambrose.
Mm-hmm.
And she was illiterate. So she allowed her grandson, Howard, to read the Bible to her. And she let him choose whatever he wanted to read, with one proviso. One proviso, don't read me anything from Paul. Nothing from Paul. Well, Paul's he's the guy who invented the religion almost. You know, you got all the letters, Corinthians, Thessalonians, all of that's Paul. And of course, that's his grandmother. Howard Thurman did just what she did. But he said one day he screwed up the courage to ask her why she didn't allow him to read from Paul. And she said, well, when we were slaves, and the master would send us a real preacher to preach, he only preached from one source. And that was Paul saying, servants, obey your masters. So Nancy Ambrose said, who was a rock rear Baptist, I don't do Paul. Now, what I'm mentioning that because as great as our faith was, we always had difficulty. You know, that's what Honorable Elijah Mohammed said that he came up in the church, his father was a pastor, but he had some problems. Mm-hmm. Okay, so, and Thurman certainly, we could talk about Thurman. Thurman had a number of issues himself. As a matter of fact, as a young man, he made a promise as a boy after he saw his father, Saul Thurman, who was not a churchgoer. He worked on the railroads, and Saul Thurman died of a TB from he would, you know, when you work in the railroad, he'd work for 2 or 3 weeks and then come home, take a shower before he got home, shave, come and see his family. And one day he came in, he had a cold, and he didn't get over it. In those days, we didn't have antibiotics, and he died. And when it was time to bury him, the church, which is the Mount Bethel Baptist Church, the pastor said he couldn't be buried because he was not a churchgoer. But because his mother-in-law was a pillar of the church, she told the deacons, the preachers come and go, but you're here all the time. He is going to get buried. So they said, you can use a church, but you've got to find a pastor. She found an itinerant pastor who said he would preach the funeral. And he did, but he did what they call, he preached Saul Thurman into hell. He preached him as an example of what happens when you die outside the church, that you're going straight to hell. And Howard Thurman, who was about 7 at the time, was sitting there with his mother. And they said he said that he turned to his mother and said, do they know Daddy? And he was so hurt that he vowed at that time he'd never have anything to do with the church. Mm-hmm. Of course, the church was such a strong factor. Right. He was a few years later, he was baptized, but even when he was baptized, they refused to give him fellowship. And his grandmother had to come back again because they didn't like his answers. And she had to come back again and say, yes, you have to take this boy in. Okay, so I'm just saying there are always issues. Right. They're always looking for more. And when I was in 68, 69, and I was one of the people that always had some idea of going into the ministry, with my father being a pastor. With the Black theology was so obviously borrowing from the Honorable Elijah Mohammed without ever giving him any credit.
Right.
That's another thing that made me say, these people are not honest. You talk about Malcolm, I said, I read Message to the Black Man. I know that what they're doing, they have to acknowledge the impact. And I knew more than that. I also knew behind the scenes what they were saying. And I think many of us did. So that's a long-winded answer. I hope it goes towards the question.
Well, Imam Earl Abdul-Malik Muhammad, he had comments on the great Howard Thurman. And we want to move to that clip now, Imam Terenzo?
Yes, if we could get that clip from the Imam's most recent address. We all had a chance to be in Washington, D.C. this past weekend, and the Imam spoke on faith, consciousness, and responsibility. Reformer W.D. Muhammad and what we owe him now. And we would like to play that clip and then speak on the other side.
Man who I met in Boston. So many years ago. I can't remember how many years it's been. Oh, maybe close to 20 years ago. Who spoke to us today? Imam Qasim Abdul-Tawwab. And his mentioning of Dr. Howard Thurman, and that Dr. Thurman was questioned about the condition of his people in the context of Christianity, in the way that it was understood that Christianity was established in America. And he said, I'm not representing that American picture. I'm representing the religion of this individual.
Yes.
His relationship with God. That's what I'm representing. His responsibility before God. That's what I'm representing. That particular emphasis and picture of the leadership of Jesus Christ on the earth is a sign spiritually. So this recognition is existing as a powerful force in the African American people. Dr. Thurman is going in other places on the earth with this recognition. And his interactions with these false perceptions of the religion of Jesus Christ allows him to express these sensitivities into the world as a sign of something. You think the Jesus Christ movement is not existing in the soul of the African American people in the way that God intended Jesus Christ to be pictured?
Mm-hmm.
That movement is in our people, pointing to a destiny, pointing to representation, pointing to strength and even power in the world. Spiritual power, cultural power, as an influence, leadership. Dr. Thurman represents Jesus Christ's movement and consciousness in the soul of the African American people, and so does Dr. Martin Luther King, pointing at something, pointing at a determination and a role for a people. A people that now, with the clarity of the Quran's guidance, know and understand and can appreciate what is proper regardfulness, consciousness of God, and consciousness of moral human responsibility in the world. It's no mistake that President Jimmy Carter, who we mourn his passing, great man, great American, a great man of faith and principle. It's no mistake that early in his administration, the first year of his administration, that he invited then leader of the world community of Islam in the West, that was just a few months before that, the Nation of Islam, to the White House. was the first of the United States presidents to acknowledge the Muslim American presence, the Muslim African American presence in America. And not just recognize it, but recognize it in the context of its important role as an influence, a spiritual influence, as a cultural influence, as a moral influence. So here is a connection with America in its purpose, as perceived by the leader of the United States of America, finding a central role for this particular people. In the context of other followers, other religious community followers, Christian leaders, Jewish leaders. But something very special in the fact that this community evolved in a very different way than other Muslim communities in the history of the traditions of Islam in the world. This particular community evolved in a very particular way to address very particular circumstances. God consciousness, taqwa, requires duty to uphold the life God intends for humanity. Do not die except as a Muslim means to live in the way that a God-conscious person should.
Praise be to Allah. You know, listening to you, Imam Qasim, you have helped me tremendously to even grasp the fuller picture of what our leaders shared with us there last Sunday there in Washington, D.C. Your connection with the history, for example, of the Honorable Elijah Mohammed and Dr. Howard Thurman. And I just want to highlight what our leader just said. He said Dr. Thurman was questioned about the condition of his people in the context of Christianity and the way it was understood that Christianity was established in America. And he said, Dr. Howard Thurman said, I'm not representing that American picture. I'm representing the religion of this individual, his relationship with God. That is what I am representing. His responsibility before God is what I am representing. End of quote. Could you speak to that?
Yeah. Imam Abdul-Malik Muhammad is 100%, from my understanding, on point. Thurman struggled to put himself with the historic Jesus, to put himself at odds with all oppression. And also, I should mention, without going too far astray, I hope, Imam Muhammad has mentioned to us how a lecture that he gave, or discussion he had on a radio program before he had became the leader, in which he talked about the problem of mythology in religion. Mm-hmm. That when that tape was given to his father by some of the other leadership, who thought it would be an occasion for him to be excommunicated, then rather than being upset after listening to it, the Honorable Elijah Mohammed was excited and said to his wife, Sister Clara Muhammad, something to the, and maybe you can correct me, isn't that what we've been looking for? Mm-hmm. That boy's got it. Mm-hmm. Well, Howard Thurman's partner at Howard University, his teacher at Morehouse College, and his lifetime friend was Dr. Benjamin Elijah Mace, who was the dean of the School of Religion when Thurman was there at first, and later became the president of Morehouse College. They were tight friends. But Dr. Thurman's master's degree, if my memory is correct, at the University of Chicago, was on mythology and religion. These men were determined to demythologize, I'm killing that word, Christianity. They were as far as they could go. They were moving parallel with what Imam Muhammad has brought us to as well. So yes, Dr. Thurman was always interested in the folks who had their backs against the wall. He looked at Jesus as a human being. He didn't like to deal with the mythological aspect. He looked at him as a human being who was inspired. As a matter of fact, my father used to always say, I got to take care of my father the last 2 years of his life when he was struggling with dementia, but the whole time. And he used to say, I wonder, how did Thurman ever get what's the word when you become a pastor? Ordained. How did he stay? But they just knew how not to ask him certain questions. He was not a Trinitarian guy. Right. His emphasis was on the voice within. As a matter of fact, so yes, one of the things I appreciated, and as I said, I've always been impressed with Thurman all of my life, but I found that Thurman has a kind of insight into Scripture that we have so richly in our leaders. Unfortunately, he never really made acquaintance, as far as I can see, with the Quran.
Let me ask you this, Imam Qasim. Do preachers, African-American preachers today, does that mind exist? The Dr. Howard Thurman type spirit?
Yes. As a matter of fact, there's a resurgence in Thurman studies, not only among African Americans, among Caucasians. Thurman was forgotten for a long while. He died in 1981. But for the last 10 to 15 years, there's been a resurgence. Dr. Fluker, who has done the papers of Howard Thurman, he's been working on this for maybe 30 years. He had access to all of the papers of Dr. Thurman that Dr. Thurman donated to Boston University. And he's been to a lot of schools. He was at Morehouse for a while. He was at Colgate Rochester for a while. He was at Boston University for a while. He retired there. But he's produced, along with some other editors, 5 volumes of the papers of Howard Thurman, another 2 volumes of sermons from those papers. And a whole school of scholarship has grown up beyond that. There's a film called Backs Against the Wall, the Howard Thurman story. It's available at PBS. That was done by a filmmaker by the name of Martin Doblmeier. It came out about 6 or 7 years ago. It is also incited interest. And the people are not just, many of them, they're not being superficial. There's a deep interest in that approach to Scripture that respects African Americans, that doesn't accept any kind of white supremacist reading of Scripture. Okay, the unfortunate part about it is we're at the same time we're pulled into this leftist approach that our scholars are in. That we've heard some commentary from Imam Qasim Mohammed about this whole Marxist bent that many of our scholars have. So that's there too, but there's a lot of very serious, very sober, and very God-conscious, I would say, thought, conversation, and struggle towards the kind of vision that Dr. Thurman had. And as I mentioned before, although for a long time, even though Dr. Thurman was very self-consciously into faith in his approach, And in his church, he was a co-founder of the Fellowship Church for All People in San Francisco. That he was a co-founder with in 1943, and he was there until 1953. It was they're doing all kinds of people, Hindus, Taoists, you name it. But there was never really a big connection with Muslims. There weren't that many Muslims here outside of us at that time. And because of the reputation, because of the onus that was put on the Nation of Islam as a separatist organization, I think that also made people put their hands up. That has, to a large extent, dissolved today.
Well, as the Imam had stated, that in the Jesus Christ movement, that is in the consciousness of many African Americans. And we have seen it over the history of time. Dr. David Walker in his appeal was the same way. Maybe not a theologian, but he would be considered a messenger in this day and time. Frederick Douglass. All these folks had this consciousness for the Jesus Christ movement. And when Mr. Farrar came over here, that's what they was looking for to turn that type of movement on in us. And it's here. And this is why the Imam says it's our responsibility. There's no other people that can shirk this responsibility, especially the African American intellect and consciousness in terms of having the discussion on the human person. This is very important for us.
And you mentioned some of our great people. There's quite a bit of evidence that Frederick Douglass came from Islamic parentage.
Yes.
There is irrefutable evidence that Booker T. Washington came from Islamic ancestors, because his name Booker is African Bukhar. Mm-hmm. He's a West African rendition of Abu Bakr. Right. And interesting enough, his biographer, who was a Jewish scholar, had a brother who was a blood brother who was an African scholar, and they recorded that 50 years ago. Oh, this guy's definitely from Muslim antecedents, because that name Booker is Bukhar. And of course, the first major book published by an African-American religious thinker that was actually read as an important religious scholarly work was Christianity, Islam, and the Negro Race. Wilmer, what's his first name? W.L. Blyden. And that was written in the last quarter, I believe it was, of the 19th century. So yeah, our precedents are heavy. And where I think it's important that we engage. See, we've got those of us who want to say that we, as African-American Muslims, should concentrate on Sunni Islam and being acceptable to the powerful economic control of the immigrants who are now dining to speak for Muslims in America. And don't emphasize Elijah Mohammed. Don't emphasize those roots. Well, they're as wrong as they can be. Mm-hmm. You missed the whole boat and jumped into the sea. Understanding the growth, the naturalness of our growth, so that the Islamic vision has been the Christian vision. And of course, what's our great brother in Washington, D.C. with the museum, brother? You have a Muslim museum in D.C.
Amir Mohammed.
Amir
Mohammed.
Amir Mohammed, yes. Oh, Amir Mohammed, okay, right, okay. I didn't hear it. And he points out that on the coast, the Gullah culture, that the Islamic, we had straight Muslim imams there during slavery. But when the Christian church was built there by the ex-slave community, that really extinguished any active Islamic influence. But when you look at the church, it was built by with the help of Muslim carpenters. So in the pews, at the end of each pew, there's the hand up saying Ahad. So why am I saying it? So we can see even within the strong Christianity was that Islamic spirit.
Yeah.
Rich history, rich history. We thank you for joining us, and hopefully this is, as Imam Hanif said, this won't be your last time joining us. We have to have you back.
It's my honor to be with you anytime that I can get there. My only problem I had sometimes in getting the show is that it's on Facebook and I can't get Facebook on my phone, so I got to get my computer. So sometimes I'm coming back from work, I can't get it. But no, this is an assembly of men and minds, thinkers that I love to be with, and I think that the more that these serious conversations are brought, the more people that would love to be with it. And I want to emphasize that yes, the spirit is a huge spirit among African-American clergy, particularly the younger clergy, to understand how to broaden that Jesus spirit to become that which can lift our people where we want to be lifted. But sometimes people get confused and they think that to get to the help from Islam, you got to go way over here and you got to deny all this, that, and other. It's not that. It's not that. So we have to get this word out. It helps us all. It helps us all to see clearly the help that God came, that God gave us, and that God continues to give us. Do I have a minute more?
Yes.
It's almost like a syllogism. I love the Negro spirituals, as they were called. But the one that says, over my head, I see trouble in the air. You know that one? Over my head, I see trouble in the air. It was repeated three times. And then what was the conclusion? There must be a God.
Somewhere.
And that, to me, is the deeper movement of African-American religion.
Right.
You know, we were left in a bad situation, but we had the faith that we were special people, that God was going to answer us the same way that he answered Moses and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and all those who were oppressed. And I think we are very close together on that. So I love to have I have a very good friend of mine, associate of mine, who is a very strong young pastor. But he did his internship at the Howard Thurman home with me, and we're like that. And I'm hoping that he got to tune in. But if he didn't, I'm gonna tell him get it later on. But his movement as a Christian pastor is very close to what to everything that we call.
I thank you for sharing that with us, Imam Qasim. When I asked you the question, does that mind still exist, the Howard Thurman types? And what you gave us as a response made my heart feel good, because we should be together.
100%.
Imam Hanif, any closing comments before I conclude with the announcements?
Well, thank you, sir. It was so exciting and exhilarating to have you on. And as Imam Terenzo said again, we would love to have you back. I would like to delve a little bit more into Howard Thurman, but your experience is also coming up as a Muslim in this country up under the leadership of Imam Deen Mohammed, and you witnessing the decline. Next time that you're on, we would like to discuss that.
Yes.
I love an invitation, my brother. And you say the word.
All right.
Praise be
Yes,
to
sir.
Allah. Well, we thank our viewing audience for joining us for another dynamic episode of BILALIAN Voices in the tradition of Imam Deen Mohammed. We'd like to give a few announcements before we conclude. Our annual Savior's Day observance will take place Sunday, November 23rd, Sunday, November 23rd, 2025, there in Detroit, Michigan, commemorating 95 years of Muslim American life and leadership excellence. Imam Earl Abdul-Malik Muhammad, the successor and partner to Imam W.D. Muhammad, will give a major public address entitled The Integrity of Our Historic Life, W.D. Muhammad and the Sacred Plan to Establish Community of Faith and Justice. The location is the International Institute of Metropolitan Detroit, 111 East Kirby Street. Doors open at 1 p.m. Program begins at 2 p.m. For more information, go to SaveYoursDay.com. And every Wednesday at 7 p.m., watch the excellent podcast, Family Ties, A Prescription for Society, the Frank and Farida Show. You can find it on Apple, Spotify, and iHeartRadio. Family Ties, A Prescription for Society. And join us every Sunday for our dynamic Islamic studies class taught in the tradition of Muhammad the Prophet with the mythology of Imam W.D. Muhammad, led by his successor, Imam Earl Abdul-Malik Muhammad. You can register at eamspeaks.com, hit the tab Islamic Studies class. Register is free, and you will be in for an excellent Islamic Studies class and discussion where you're able to make comments and ask questions. Now we would like to conclude with the prayer of purification and purpose of Imam W.D. Muhammad. O Allah, we cannot manage this life for ourselves, not without you. Please make our life what you would want it to be, what you prefer it to be. Do not allow us to act on our own. Help us to act only in obedience to you. We hear you, we obey you, we look to you for forgiveness, our Lord, and to you is the destination. Amen.